It didn't dawn on me at first, but the title of this German and Czech Netflix movie really could have been called I Am Groot, because of a specific scene towards the end where the characters are all saying the title to each other in a huddle. Sorry. Back to the point. Je Suis Karl is a politically charged drama. So are you going to be watching? Maxi, the survivor of a terrorist attack, joins the charming Karl and becomes part of a European youth movement, one that aims for nothing less than seizing power. So confession time, I really thought this movie was about Charlie Hebdo because all I had in my head was Je suis Charlie. If you don't know, that phrase came out of a terrorist attack on the French magazine Charlie Hebdo. I went through more than a handful of minutes waiting for the story to get to addressing those attacks, which of course it never did. Je Suis Karl follows a young woman named Maxi who lost most of her family in a terrorist attack in the building where she lived. She has a chance meeting with this handsome guy named Karl and begins to learn more about a movement that he's part of, one that looks to change the political landscape across Europe. As Maxi is spending more time with Karl and becoming more endeared to him, her dad is left to pick up the pieces of his life. He's hurt, confused, and missing his daughter, who is pretty much the only thing he has left. Although the story tries to keep the motives of Karl and his movement obscure, I felt they were pretty obvious to us as an audience, even if they're not so obvious to Maxi. When you look around the crowds at the meetings and listen to the words being spoken, it becomes very clear very quickly that this movement has only one type of person in mind when they speak of protection and rights. They're out to promote the white race, wanting to push all other races out of the countries. And the story uses fear as the big motivator. And because of the trauma that Maxi endured, it's easy to see how she becomes sucked into their message and doesn't even notice the racist hate that's contained within the group. At the very beginning of the movie, we meet Maxi's parents, who through a sort of just found footage type of montage, are on their way to pick up a refugee and sneak him into Germany in order to get him a better life. I love how this sets up Maxi's upbringing without being terribly overt about it. It's clear that she grew up in a familial culture that values life above race or borders, which this then contrasts nicely with the message of Karl and his goons. For the most part, this is shot really well, and the visual delivery works to tell us a very cohesive story. There are a couple of points, though, where there were flashbacks, and it took me more than a few minutes to realize that it was actually a flashback. I understood what was going on, but I couldn't tell if it was happening in a new situation or if we were witnessing something that had already occurred. And something that I wasn't sure of at first, but I ended up enjoying, was the editing style that they used. There were jump cuts at certain points to move actions along more quickly without losing any context to the scene. For example, a guy wants to call somebody and asks another person for the number. The scene then cuts to the phone at the dude's ear with the phone on the other end ringing. I mean, we didn't need to see the phone number being given and then dialed. Those are just wasted moments that don't add anything. I wish the movie would have used the same sensibility all the way through, though. It's 2 hours and 6 minutes long, and I did feel the time at points. There were montages that seemed to go on much longer than necessary because they weren't actually progressing the narrative forward. I'd much rather have the establishing scene, get some good context for what's happening, and then move to the next area to keep the momentum going and retain the intensity. As the story progresses, it gains momentum even though we know where it's headed. Part of the reason we know where the narrative is going is because the characters tell us exactly what to expect. What I didn't expect, though, was the explosive climax at the very end. Everything that has been building comes to a head. And I'm not sure I totally bought into the buildup, though. I mean, I didn't get the feeling that tensions were as high as they were supposed to be, nor did I get the sense that the number of supporters were as high as the climax displays. We're told that there are big amounts of followers and supporters, but when we see events, there might be a couple hundred people maybe at most. I think it would have been more effective for the story to have one of the venues be outdoors, where just this monster number of attendees could be present, which then would reinforce the hype that supposedly exists. I enjoyed the acting from the main players. Karl is charismatic and charming, so it makes it very easy to believe the draw that he has on Maxi. Maxi may look familiar to you because Luna Vedler was most recently starring in the second season of the Netflix series Biohackers. She plays Maxi very convincingly as a grieving and then disenchanted young woman. I mean, life doesn't make too much sense, so she's looking for validation of her sadness and her anger. The performance from the actor that plays her dad, Milan Peschel, I think is how you pronounce his name, he's outstanding. He's a damaged soul, and I think he brings some real humanity to the story. Now, the cinematography in this is a great mix of cinematic shots mixed with some shaky and grainy social media shots. And the mix works to keep it visually interesting, but also to put us right into the middle of the story. We're involved as it unfolds, almost participating as an attendee of an event. Now, the final shot of the movie is beautiful and it's patient, and it's also kind of pointless. Or maybe it's just more frustrating than pointless. The story doesn't give us much resolution. We reach a climax, watch all kinds of craziness unfold, and then the narrative leaves us in that. I didn't even get a sense that it was making a statement. And I'm not sure if the story was criticizing or supporting Karl's movement. I don't think there was ever a strong antagonist to Karl's group or their thoughts, but the story also didn't necessarily hold them up in high regard. It was like the story was trying to remain neutral in its stance, but because it spends more time showing us the beliefs of Karl's group, it's hard to believe that the story doesn't support it in some way. We never get a real good counter message to the hate. There's the subtle one with Maxi's dad and how he and his wife rescued the refugee, like I mentioned, but that's about it. The more I sat with this, the less I actually liked the story. While the drama was decently built, its lack of clear stance was more bothersome than anything. Maybe you're going to see it differently or have a different reaction to this, but for me, it's hard to recommend this. There's sex, nudity, a lot of profanity, and some terrible violence. I give Je Suis Karl 2 out of 5 couches. What are you watching right now? Anything good you can recommend to me in the comments? If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me. I am Groot.